Hope you enjoyed that blast from the past of me talking about Operation Urgent Fury. We're moving on now to the Cabinet, Article 2, Section 2. The Cabinet, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. And this is the constitutional authorization for the Cabinet of the United States. These guys and gals run cabinet agencies on behalf of the president. The executive department is way too big for one guy to handle, and gives the president advice on any number of issues that they may seek advice on. The cabinet will get together whenever the president wants. There aren't any formal requirements for get-togethers or any requirements for why they have to get together. They can, just depending on the president, there can be very serious meetings where the business of the nation is handled, or self-congratulatory type events after a PR victory or a military victory, any sort of thing where the administration feels the need to gather and congratulate itself. So the cabinet-level agencies and their heads are as follows. Secretary Marco Rubio is in charge of the Department of State. Secretary Scott Bessent is the Department of the Secretary. The Department of Defense is headed by Secretary Pete Hegseth. So I will ask you to remember these names: Rubio, State, Bessent at Treasury, and Hegseth at Defense. I will ask you to remember those names. Those are the big three in this administration. Also, you need to know who she is, because the Department of Justice is always on the news these days. So Pam Bondi, please know her. And the rest of this is just really to show you how vast our federal government is. The Department of the Interior, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Homeland Security, Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the CIA, the U.S. Trade Representative, the Administrator of the Small Business Administration, and the White House Chief of Staff. But again, I'm only asking for State, Treasury, Defense, and Attorney General. Know those four names. That's it. The rest of this is just trying to illustrate the point that it's a pretty big federal government we've got. So the Vice President is also kind of ex officio part of the cabinet. It's in the interest of the administration, whatever administration that might be, that the number two, man or woman, knows what's going on. And there can be additions or subtractions to this body depending upon the pleasure of the president. So Bush 43, Bush the Younger, his United Nations ambassador wasn't a cabinet officer. Republicans typically are not big fans of the United Nations. Democrats more so. He gave, though, the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy cabinet rank instead of the UN ambassador. And typically, cabinet meetings also include the U.S. Trade Representative, the White House Chief of Staff, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the CIA Director. That's usual. That's not saying all the time, but usually they'll be in there too. So pardons. And he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. I guess his own or anybody else's. If the vice president's being impeached for something, he couldn't intervene there. This is a a famous scene. Every Thanksgiving, the president traditionally pardons the Thanksgiving turkey. Now, I typically ask in my in-person classes who thinks the president has the constitutional authority to pardon poultry, and 5 or 6 students always put their hands up. The answer is absolutely not. The president has no authority over birds. Just people, not birds. This is just a stunt. I think from my understanding there are 2 turkeys, and the other one I don't think they serve it up anymore, but I think both of them go live good long lives in petting zoos. So pardons can be fairly wide-ranging for any number of reasons, and I pick examples from the administration that's currently in power when I teach this unit. Normally we would still be discussing Biden administration pardons, but Trump has chosen to pardon pretty liberally in his second administration. So there are 3 examples, maybe 2, maybe 3, 3 I think, of Trump pardons, and here we go. So Ross Ulbricht, he operated Silk Road, which was a dark web marketplace where illegal drugs were sold. Ulbricht was convicted in 2015 in New York in a narcotics and money laundering conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. So President Trump agreed with libertarians who said the conviction was an example of federal overreach. Ulbricht was found guilty of charges including, but not limited to, conspiracy to commit drug trafficking, money laundering, and computer hacking. There is his pardon, his official pardon from the Department of Justice. I'd encourage you to click on that and read it. Pardoned on January 21st, 2025. And there is, again, in the interest of me preserving this YouTube channel for future generations of students, I am not going to click on the video, but I would encourage you to and learn more about this particular pardon. Moving on, granting pardons and commutation of sentences for certain offenses relating to the events at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. Now, this was just, it was up there. It was one of the first ones. Commuted the sentences of some January 6ers. A proclamation. This proclamation ends a grave national injustice, he says, that has been perpetuated upon the American people over the last 4 years and begins a process of national reconciliation. Acting pursuant to the grant of authority in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States, I do hereby commute the sentences of the following individuals convicted of offenses related to events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, to time served as of January 20th, 2025. And he lists the people. Click there for more information. And click there. Again, copyright strike. I can't click on it. So, treaties. In Article 2, Section 2, the President has the authority, with the advice and consent of the Senate, so another check and balance, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And the one I just have been stuck on for a while now, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which was a Clinton agreement, 1993. Again, watch the video. Watch the video. So NAFTA was pretty highly contentious because our government wasn't entirely sure what it was going to do to our economy, if it was going to bring jobs to the United States or send them to Mexico, because labor and manufacturing and all costs were and are cheaper in Mexico. Would it be good for the American worker or what would happen. But anyway, the Senate passes it 61-38 in the 103rd Congress, and it becomes law. And there is a link if you want to see who voted for it, who didn't. But that's NAFTA. Please watch those video links. Those are there for a reason, and give you a whole lot more of the meat and potatoes than what I'm permitted by the YouTube gods to give to you. So nominations and appointments. You hear all the time about Supreme Court appointments. So I am choosing instead to talk to you about ambassadorial appointments. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. Now that gives him authority to appoint Supreme Court, to nominate anyway, Supreme Court, and the Senate appoint Supreme Court justices too. But this works. This is the authority in the Constitution for any presidential nomination. So this guy is the ambassador to the Court of St. James, which is the United Kingdom. His name is Warren A. Stevens, and he was confirmed on April 29th, 2025. President Trump himself swore him in the next day, and he made his way across the pond to present his credentials to King Charles III on May 21st, 2025 at Buckingham Palace. Now, Stevens, like so many of his predecessors accredited to the Court of St. James, served as a chairman, in this case of a banking firm. Most ambassadorial appointments to countries like the United Kingdom, France, maybe Italy, we put people in who are rich. Not to put too fine a point on it, because we don't need really a stable, a 40-year veteran of the State Department. Our diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom aren't going to be become so tricky that we need somebody who is of that there. This guy will do the job. He lives in that house, Winfield House, so he would have to be rich also, because the State Department's budget doesn't allocate enough money, not nearly enough money, to keep that monstrosity up to par. So Warren Stevens here, he succeeded his father as head of a family business. Sound familiar? In this case, a banking firm. He served all up and down Arkansas, Museum of Fine Arts Foundation Board, chair of the Episcopal Collegiate School Foundation Board, heavy community involvement. And let me just address a couple of points I glossed over here too. The United States ambassador to the Court of St. James. The king is the head of state of the United Kingdom. It's weird, but this is the way it works. The most senior palace in the United Kingdom is St. James Palace. So, the United States ambassador isn't accredited to Britain, but to the oldest residence still in existence of the monarch. So King Charles's court at St. James Palace. And he has to present credentials to the head of state, in this case King Charles III, because without that he can't do the work of an ambassador in King Charles's country. And that's the way it works in any country. You have to present your credentials before you can work as an ambassador. So as I said, I mean, these really high-profile ambassadorships, often they'll go to wealthy donors to the incumbent president. I haven't looked up financial contributions by him to President Trump, but I suspect there would be some. He is fit for purpose, especially since I just showed you the House. You know, we don't need a seasoned diplomat. Diplomatic relations are pretty stable. And the State Department's budget doesn't fund that monstrosity. And we're supposed to show the flag, as it were, and host big parties and gatherings and wow people and show them what a powerful, great country we are. And I would encourage you to click on this and take the tour of Winfield House. It's really cool, in my opinion. So the Senate hearings, they go before the Senate, these ambassadorial nominees, and they answer questions in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Now, the clip I'm showing you is a hearing involving a George James Souness, who was President Obama's nominee as ambassador to Norway. And I thought it would be more fun and more likely to hold your interest if I showed you an example of a hearing that went really, really sideways really quick. Then after this hearing, Mr. Souness withdrew his nomination and hasn't been heard from since. I don't know if he has or he hasn't, but it was a pretty bad hearing. Anderson Cooper interviews the late Senator John McCain pretty quick after this hearing, and that's another interesting watch. Again, I pick out these links to external sources with care, so my hope is that you do watch them. But yeah, Anderson Cooper, John McCain, some really interesting stuff that is talked about that I hope you take advantage of and watch. So we'll get to recess appointments in just a moment.